Welcome back to ThreadWatch. Have you been keeping up? Prototype Thread. Post Holy Grails and Interesting Susan. Thanks Anon. Hope someday the alpha version of Secret of Mana gets leaked. Pick related is the earliest version of the world map. Wasn't it being developed for that SNES-PlayStation thing? I think they had to cut out a bunch of Susan when they moved back to cartridges. Yes it was, and when the thing was cancelled the devs had to cut a lot of things to make the game fit into the cartridge, something that is easily visible around the second half of the game, in which there are tons of recolored bosses and unfinished dungeons designs. Freddy for NES, where you travel through pipes and kill teenagers, would have been based. Who was the dev on that? Sounds interesting for a NES game. Developed by Rare and composed by David Wise, interestingly enough. According to the game magazines Nintendo Power and Nintendo of Europe, the original concept of this game varied greatly from what was eventually released. In the original game concept, the players would control Freddy Krueger and should kill the teenagers who were attempting to gather his scattered bones in order to rebury them. Follows the synopsis of the prototype version of the game. You are Freddy Krueger. A horde of obnoxious teenagers is trying to get rid of you by finding your scattered bones and burying them. The only way to stop them is to kill them. You can travel along Elm Street through the electrical and plumbing lines, or step into a mirror and step in another room. The kids have weapons to battle you with, and some of them even possess powerful dream alter egos. But if you can strike before they wake, they'll trouble you no more. So sharpen up your finger razors and get ready to slash, cause Freddy's here. It is assumed that this version of the game had been cancelled to prevent controversy. Years earlier, a video game adaptation of the movie The Texas Chainsaw Massacre had been released for the Atari 2600, where the player controls the murderer with the objective to chase and kill victims. The game was a financial failure because many sellers refused to sell it, fearing reprisals. Whatever else sucks about the world, at least we don't live in the timeline where Doom 4 was a Call of Duty clone. I find leftover assets really intriguing, like that imp animation is exactly the same as in the game. While everything else in the project changed, that file stayed the same. It's like seeing, ancient ruins in a city and imagining how they stayed in place while buildings were built and demolished around them. That Susan looks primitive compared to the actual DS, damn. That D-pad is blasphemy. Pretty sure there's a more complete version of that SNES-like shaped first design that was sent with some of very first PS1 devkits, but someone more knowledgeable should confirm. Found a pic of the more SNES-shaped controller here. Very few left probably. I think there's one a bit more final than this one too, but I have a bad memory. Deep Cover, a cancelled stealth espionage by Looking Glass set in 1950s Cuba. We never got to see the M2 compete with the Dreamcast and PS2. Its Susaning hurts, man. 3DO could have had another chance on the console market, especially since the M2 was loads more powerful than the 3DO. There is something charming about pre-Microsoft Halo screenshots, maybe is because is something we will never get. I wonder if the plot would have been the same or got remade with the genre change. Always fun to think of what could have been. There's a character to those Myth Engine assets. I am confident that we will at least get one of the early functioning RTS builds in our lifetime though. Marcus Leto and a few other ex-Boongies have shown pics, vids of it. Only a matter of time. Twisted Metal, Harbor City for me. There is a prototype ROM out there, but that one is barely playable, and it's a way early build, comparing to the screenshots shown. It's Susaning Hurts, the sequel looked so promising. All your 6th gen friends, featuring a not final Xbox pad. I never had an Xbox and always forget the Duke had 6 misaligned face buttons and no shoulder bumpers. Leg. It is interesting to think Panasonic chickened out, losing faith in their product just before manufacturing, but Microsoft went in head first knowing their first console will fail. The original Xbox was an interesting experiment. I think it did better than MS was actually expecting because of Halo and online services. I never knew about this What the Susan? This was going to happen. Death and Taxes. Legit a good title. RTX Reflections before RTX. How did Bungie do it? They rendered a second world inside of his head. Cube maps. Notice it's only his visor being affected. Don't cube maps have to be built? A cube map is just a six-sided texture. They're most often used as pre-computed textures that represent reflection data, but they don't have to be pre-computed and they don't really have to be reflection data either. Why do video game designers Susan around with all these workarounds and not just create actual reflections? A real-time cube map seems like a better use of time. Assigning the closest pre-computed static cube map is dirt cheap and very easy to do since most of the time the generation part is automated anyways. For real-time cube map reflections, or planar map reflections, or shadow mapped shadows, you need to render an extra 1 to 4 new real-time cameras to get that reflections perspective, kind of like a split-screen view except on a surface instead of directly on a screen, so it's very expensive. Even in games that do have real-time reflections, GTA 5, Half-Life 2, Hitman, you can notice that they try really hard to only show you one reflection at a time, or it's only really used when accuracy is very important. Car reflections in racing games did have another. I remember reading about when a MUS employee took a picture of a truckload of these being loaded in somewhere and posted it on their blog to be immediately fired when they went into work later in the week. The fact a Microsoft console dev kit is literally an Apple Tower with the logo and everything will never stop amusing me. Looks like a concept car from the 70s. Looks oddly similar to the fat PS3. Weird no one has posted Banjo or Zelda. I used to go on Banjo fan sites and seeing them actually show that area clearly was Susaning insane. That was one of the holy grail mysteries for the entire fanbase and they just showed it like it was nothing. That video was wonderfully based. You're a big guy. For you. That Susaner is CHONKY. Oh damn, the first PlayStation was supposed to play DVDs too. Maybe, but the DVD format was released a year after the PS1. Proto-documentation only became a proper thing somewhat recently because nobody wanted protos back then. Now ton of Susan is on hand of hoarders. And then some autismo dropped 20k on a proto just to spite everyone. There are people who have been hoarding this Susan have had it since the early 2000s. There are others lurking who are far more knowledgeable than me, but even back in Assembler's early days you would see these people ponying up top dollar for 64DD dev carts and Susan like that only to remain radio silent on all fronts. Most publishers and developers didn't care as well. As long as NDARD stuff stayed hidden like the Xbox documentation, though that was NDA so hard that Microsoft had to send representatives to pick up all documentation from a developer going out of business. Debug kits they didn't care about though. Hoarders would just descend on bankruptcy-ridden developers. Unless they were like Rare who unironically built a fireproof bunker to store everything from their development in. That controller is for sale on eBay, $6,249 though lol. I'm really spooked about subliminal messaging, how even right now everything from your phone to some random video could be CIA spook conditioning and you'd never know or be able to prove it. Dreamcast Digital Home Gateway. Slightly more powerful Dreamcast with cable, DVR capabilities, partnership with UK satellite company. Could download full games, demos, and DLC to a 40GB HDD. Picture-in-picture technology, could play a game while watching live TV on the same screen. This one always makes me lol. Dreamcast DVD player. Literally a hollowed-out DVD player chassis with Sega branding thrown on it. Non-functioning, never intended to be in production or sold. Intended to please shareholders and make the public a little more confident about the Dreamcast as the PS2 was stealing the spotlight. Vita Proto. See interesting thread with 250 plus replies, open it. Scroll through. Nothing is getting a lot of views. Nothing is thus worth my time. Get off. CYA nerds. Thanks for watching, see you on the boards.